I appreciate all of you coming out tonight, and very much looking forward to delivering this lecture and then taking your questions afterwards. Many of you may completely agree with what I have to say, which is great. I hope that you're here if you don't agree with me. But at the end, we'll have a time for interaction, for questions, as long as it relates to the topic tonight. Terrific. And if I say some things that you're passionate about, you don't need to jump up and, give me a high five or anything. If I say things that you absolutely hate, you can give me a dirty look, you can roll your eyes, that's fine. But then we'll have a chance to interact and do some Q&A afterwards. If you want to connect with me on social media, we're most active on Facebook. That's Ask Dr. Brown, ASKDR Brown. We've got a couple 100,000 fans there, and every day there's super lively discussions, sometimes involving several million people. So great place to interact. Or on Twitter, it's Dr. Michael L. Brown, and we'll be shooting out some notes about this, maybe posting some pictures as well. So I've been asked to address the topic of same-sex marriage, progress, or regress. And what I want to do is this. I want to explain why I understand for the gay and lesbian community why this issue is so critically important, and why this is obviously a matter of tremendous progress. The Supreme Court ruling on June 26, redefining marriage in America. My own perspective is very different, and I want to explain why I believe it's a matter of regress, going backwards, going in the wrong direction, rather than progress. Now, at the end, I'm happy to bring the scriptures in. If you want to ask me about the Bible or how that relates or challenge my views of scripture, fine. But what I'm presenting is simply based on what's happening in the society. My argument in that respect is secular, although obviously God factors into everything in terms of my thinking and my worldview. So first, let's understand what this means to gay couples. The Supreme Court saying that marriage could be the union of two men or two women in the decision on June 26th. I'm not gay myself. I can't claim to relate fully to what this means to the gay and lesbian community, but I do understand the tremendous importance of it. Andrew Sullivan, well-known gay journalist, said this is over 20 years ago: if nothing else were done at all and gay marriage were legalized, 90% of the political work necessary to achieve gay and lesbian equality will have been achieved. It's ultimately the only reform that matters. So in terms of, quote, equality, this would be the big thing. Once you have this, everything else falls into place. More recently, Michelangelo Signorilli said this: is also a chance to wholly transform the definition of family in American culture. It is the final tool with which to dismantle all sodomy statutes, get education about homosexuality and AIDS into public schools, and in short, usher in a sea change in how society views and treats us. So the implications are societal, according to gay activists, gay journalists. What about on a personal level? Someone sent me this email just this week, and they quoted what a gay friend had to say. This is on a personal level. This is what he wrote. All day I've been trying to find the right words to describe today, a gay young man. For 21 years, I struggled with accepting who I was inside and believing that the way I was made was okay. For 21 years, I told myself, if you just pray, it would go away. For 21 years, I lied to everyone in my life, telling them I was something I was not. For 21 years, I thought I was a mistake and for whatever reason wasn't worthy of true happiness. 3 years ago, I looked at myself in the mirror and made the decision to come out to the most important people in my life, not knowing if I would ever be able to find that happiness. 3 years ago, I still believed I would forever be alone and not be able to marry. The 24 years I have lived on this earth have been full of hardship and so much uncertainty, but one thing is certain, is that I will marry whoever I want, and that comes from a place of eternal love. You may not understand or agree, but the love my faith taught me has no limits, and I love who I am, and I love the way that God created me. Then this 24-year-old gay man says this: today, speaking of June 26th, Supreme Court decision, is a huge victory and the happiness in so many. I am so proud to be a part of this community and so proud of those who have fought for what they believe in. This is a small step in the bigger picture, and there is still so much work left to do. I stand on the right side of history, and I hope that you will too. Love is love. No matter race, gender, religion, or sexual orientation, we are all able to love freely and with whoever we choose. Finally, God bless every single human on this earth, and God bless the LGBT community. Obviously, he speaks for millions of Americans in saying that. Obviously, he speaks for gays and lesbians who have been fighting for the right to, quote, marry for many, many years. That's not my perspective, but I want to say I can fully understand from his shoes why he sees it like this. And I can fully understand from his viewpoint why my views would be considered primitive or bigoted or hateful or intolerant or discriminatory. I could understand from his viewpoint. What I want to lay out tonight is why it's not that whatsoever. My reasons for saying marriage should not be redefined have nothing to do with bigotry, discrimination, intolerance, or hatred. They have to do with much, much more, as you'll see in a moment. But I think it's important that we also lay this out. If I talk about marriage being under fire in America, if I talk about the deterioration of marriage in America, heterosexuals are first and foremost to blame. If we did not have no-fault heterosexual divorce, we would not have the problems we're having today. No-fault heterosexual divorce has done more to destroy marriage than all gay activists combined. That's on us. That's on heterosexuals. That's on my generation and wrong decisions that were made. That's why it's so much more common for your generation to grow up in broken homes. That's why it's so much more common for your generation to be disconnected from a mother or a father, or at the age of 8, trying to negotiate between a mom and a dad and try to make peace. That's not a position you should have been in. That's why we have such an increase in fatherless homes and all the problems that brings about. That starts with us, and I'm not blaming any gay activist in the world for it. Let me go a step further. Hypocritical Christians have done more to undermine the sanctity of marriage than any court or politician or gay activist organization could possibly do. When we, professing Jesus as Lord, as followers of Jesus, have so many problems in our midst with scandals among leaders committing adultery, with pornography rife in our midst, with so much no-fault divorce in the church, how are we then supposed to turn around and say that someone else is doing wrong? We first need to recognize our own sin and our own wrong acts and repent of that and get right with God and set a better example. And so from the heart, and I've done this many times before, I apologize to both my non-Christian and Christian friends, both gay and straight, for the mess that we, meaning professing heterosexual followers of Jesus, the mess that we have made of things. By God's grace, we're committed to being better examples of purity, morality, and faith. All right, having said that, let's address the question of same-sex marriage, progress or regress. Do you believe in marriage equality for all? I mean, that's a mantra we commonly hear. Marriage equality for all. Well, what exactly does that mean? According to the Marriage Equality blog spot, it advocates for, quote, the right of consenting adults to share and enjoy love, sex, residence, and marriage without limits on the gender, number, or relation of participants. Full marriage equality is a basic human right. Do you embrace full marriage equality? If you just say, no, it's got to be 2 people or you can't be closely related, this website would say you're being bigoted and discriminatory and intolerant. Do you really want marriage equality for all? That's one of the mantras of gay activism, is it not? If love is love, come on, what are the sayings? What are the slogans? Love is love. If love wins, and if you have the right to marry the one you love, then why not? How far do you actually want this to go? When our president tweets out love wins and love is love after major Supreme Court decisions, well, how are you going to tell 2 or 3 or 5 or 8 or 11 or whatever number of people or combination that if love is love and you have the right to marry the one you love and marriage equality for all and love wins, how are you going to tell them, but no, it only has to be 2? It's a question we'll come back to in a little while. Lest you think I'm just pulling things out of the air, how about Ireland, which has recently voted to redefine marriage? As reported in the Irish Times, independent Senator David Norris, himself gay, has said that gay cousins should be allowed to marry each other following the same-sex marriage referendum. Why not gay cousins? And you say, well, no, if you're closely related, there could be problems with the children, but you can't have children. That's his argument. This is what he says. After all, since gays can't procreate, there's no danger in having children with genetic defects. So why can't gay cousins marry, or for that matter, gay brothers or gay sisters? Well, why not? After all, if love is love. Some of you seem bigoted. This is UNC Charlotte campus. I see bigotry here. You seem bigoted against close related couples. Wow. Let's take the question further. Why 2? Why the number 2? Here, I put this out. I put it out on social media. I put it out on my national radio show. I put it out in lectures, debates on campus. I have still yet to get a coherent answer to this question. A gay journalist with the Huffington Post said, I'll answer. His answer was completely worthless, debunked in a matter of seconds. So here's my question. And maybe tonight someone will take up my challenge to answer it. If marriage is not the union of a man and a woman, then why should it be limited to 2 people? Or for that matter, require 2 people? Why can't it be 1 or 3 or 5? What makes the number 2 so special if it doesn't refer to the union of a male and a female? So let's think it through for a minute, okay? Man and a woman are physically and biologically designed for each other. They carry within themselves the unique components of sperm and egg. By the way, I don't know if you're up to date on science, but the fact remains that there's no such thing as a baby without a male and female involved. Just want to point that out. And so the 2 must come together as one to form a marriage. The man and woman also share a unique complementarity emotionally and spiritually. Have you ever heard the saying that men are from Mars and women from Venus? Which is why the union of a man and woman is special, distinctive, and even sacred. And that's why the union of a man and woman has been recognized as marriage throughout the ages. As cultural analyst Robert Knight remarked, the term marriage refers specifically to the joining of 2 people of the opposite sex. When that is lost, marriage becomes meaningless. You can no more leave an entire sex out of marriage and call it marriage than you can leave chocolate out of a chocolate brownie recipe. It becomes something else. So a simple question. If marriage is not the unique union of one man and one woman, with what they bring potentially biologically and with emotional and spiritual complementarity, if it's not the union of a man and woman, why does it require 2 people? Why can't you do what some women have recently done? Yes, this is documented. Yes, this really happened. They married themselves. Why can't you marry yourself? One woman had gotten tired of dating and she was divorced and got tired of relying on a man to treat her right. She decided, I'll take myself out for dinner and I'll get myself gifts when I want and I'll marry myself. And she had a wedding ceremony and the whole bit, and a number of people attended. The only smart words spoken that day were by her 11-year-old son, who said, Mom, I love you, but you're embarrassing me. Well, why not? And who's to say it has to stop at 2 people? Again, if it's not the union of a man and a woman, if love is love, if love wins, if marriage equality for all is our mantra, then why not more? When it becomes something else, Robert Knight says it can become virtually anything else, which is why polyamorous, along with polygamists, are also clamoring for their relationships to be legally recognized. As U.S. News and World Report noted, just 3 days after the Supreme Court ruling, quote, polyamorous rights advocates see marriage equality coming for them. Why not? And let's remember that polyamorous advocates, they are saying multiple loving, committed relationships in the same home. So it could be 2 guys and a lady. It could be the one couple I read about, or not a couple, there are 3 of them, but it was a husband and wife, but the husband didn't want to have kids, so her boyfriend wanted to have kids, so he said, that's fine, we'll all live together. Yeah, what? And then there's some where it's 2 couples and they come together, polyamorous. According to Newsweek magazine several years ago, there were 500,000 polyamorous families in America. What about them? Why not thruples? You say you're making this up. I'm not making that up. That took place in Massachusetts a couple years back. 3 women, white gowns, the whole bit. 2 of them had their dads walk them down the aisle. Why not? This picture went viral in Thailand earlier this year. 3 men. The pictures went viral. They couldn't legally marry in Thailand, but they still had a formal ceremony. Why not thruples? You're going to be bigoted against thruples? You're going to say that they don't love each other? Marriage equality for all. Love wins. I have the right to marry the one I love. If marriage is just a matter of who you love, then why not thruples? Why not polyamory? I mean, this is showtime. It's been a show for some years, married and dating. Why not these various relations? And they're saying, what about us? Why are you treating us like second-class citizens? Why not polygamy? Do you know in the last few years that public acceptance of polygamy, according to a Gallup poll, went from 7% in America to 14%? Jumped that quickly, doubled in just a few years? You think this may have something to do with it? Big love on TV? How about Sister Wives on TV? Cast of Sister Wives, well, the reality show people, they went to court in Utah and they successfully had one part of the ban against polygamy already removed. And how about the latest, My Five Wives? Well, why not? Why isn't that also legitimate? How can you say that you're just going to limit it to 2? Based on what? Let's take a look at the ruling of Justice Kennedy, writing for the majority, the 5-4 majority in the Obergefell decision on June 26. Let's look at the 4 main reasons he gives why marriage should be redefined. And let's ask the question, does this limit it to 2 people? Let's take a look. Argument number 1, the nature of marriage is that through its enduring bond, 2 persons together can find other freedoms such as expression, intimacy, and spirituality. Can't this apply, though, equally to 3 or more people? Why is that number 2 so magic? If it's not a man and a woman with what they bring together, the potential biologically, the natural potential of reproducing children and joining a child to a mother and father, and the complementarity they bring, why 2? This argument makes absolutely no sense to be limited to 2, because 3 persons can find other freedoms such as expression, intimacy, and spirituality. So scratch that one off. Argument number 2. The right to marry is fundamental because it supports a 2-person union unlike any other in its importance to the committed individuals. As this court held in Lawrence, meaning Lawrence v. Texas, same-sex couples have the same right as opposite-sex couples to enjoy intimate association. Well, why not thruples? I mean, why not? Can't this apply equally to 3 or more people? Of course. Of course it can. How about argument number 3? A third basis for protecting the right to marry is that it safeguards children and families and thus draws meaning from related rights of child rearing, procreation, and education. Hang on. I have a slight problem with some of this. Same-sex couples can procreate. They themselves, if the most loving, committed same-sex couple, the sweetest couple, the nicest guys, the nicest gals you ever met, if you leave them alone on an island and come back 50 years later, they cannot procreate. No matter how committed to each other, no matter how much they love each other, they can't. So that makes his reasoning bogus. In fact, this works much better for polygamous couples or polyamorous couples where at least you have a male-female mix. Because same-sex couples can't procreate or join a child to its biological parents, whereas polygamous or polyamorous couples can. Let's go a little further. Argument number 4. Marriage, Justice Kennedy says, is a keystone of our social order. As Dr. J. Michelson, gay professor, explained, enabling same-sex couples to marry strengthens rather than weakens marriage in general, because you're encouraging people to make a serious commitment to each other, right? Well, again, the same argument can be made for other marital arrangements. And history teaches us that societies are as strong as their marriages, meaning heterosexual, childbearing, and child-rearing marriages. What the effects of same-sex marriage will be on society remains to be seen. So there's not a syllable, read through all of Justice Kennedy's decision, not a single syllable that explains why marriage must be limited to 2 people. And that's why it is no surprise that other groups are already saying, same reasons, what about us? And let me tell you this, based on his decision, they have every right to say that. Let's go further. Why does the government even care about marriage? Does the government tell you who you can like or not like? Does the government tell you who you can date or not date? No. Unless you're doing harm to another person, there's some abusive relationship within a family, an incestuous relationship, unless it's something against your will, the government has no business telling you who you can love or who can love you. That's not the role of the government. And every American would say, who does the government think they are to tell me that? Picture this, you gotta write a letter to the president or to Congress to get approval before you date somebody. Of course, it's complete nonsense. So why is the government involved in marriage? That's a simple question. They don't tell you who you can date. If you're just sleeping together outside of wedlock, the government doesn't tell you you can't do that. So why does the government get involved in marriage? It's really simple. There's only one reason the government is involved in marriage, and that's because marriage conveys benefits on society, and so society conveys benefits on marriage. That's the only reason. Otherwise, government's got no business involved in who you love or who loves you, or unless it's an abusive, dangerous relationship. It's got no business being involved. So marriage, by definition, through history, produces children for the next generation and joins those children to their mother and father. And that is to the benefit of society. Do you know if people stop having kids, the ones that suffer most are the ones that are going to grow older without a support system to follow them? Do you know that the average age of childbearing for women, so say between 18 and 44 years roughly, that if they give birth to roughly 2.1 children per generation, then the next generation is sustained. When it drops below that, the support system starts to break down. There are not adequate resources, there's not adequate care for the generation that gets older. And there's an epidemic of that now around the world where the birth rate has dropped precariously low. In countries like Japan, in countries like Russia, in countries like Greece, in countries like Spain, precariously low. So marriage, when you've thought about marriage, you've always thought about marriage in terms of family, okay? And it's only a male and female who can reproduce. And marriage is going to be based on the norm, not the exception to the rule. And then what's the stable environment that's in the best interest of a society long term? A kid being raised by mom and dad. This has been proven in thousands of studies, and common sense would taught you, generally speaking, the stability of being raised in an environment where the couple is together over the years and the couple is invested in the lives of their children is going to be the best for social welfare overall. That's the only reason the government gets involved in the issue of marriage. Marriage produces children for the next generation, joins those children to their mother and father. By definition, only heterosexual marriage can do that, and society is only concerned with the overall definition and purpose of marriage, not with exceptions to the rule, meaning, what about an older couple that can't have kids, or a barren couple? It's looking at who can produce and who can join the children to the parents, and that's simple. Listen, I have read stories and seen pictures like others and watched the reality shows where people, a gay couple adopts a child, or maybe a gay man through artificial insemination impregnates a lesbian woman, and then they work out arrangements for the child. And I've seen their tears. I'm not saying people don't care. I'm not saying gays and lesbians are incapable of loving kids. Of course I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying it's not marriage, and it's ultimately not in the best interest of kids to willingly deprive them of either a mother or father from birth. That cannot be when you sit back and say, what would be the very best thing I could do for this child? We're going to deprive them either from their mother or father by choice from birth. Cannot be done in an altruistic way for children. A homosexual cannot procreate, cannot join the children they raise to their mother and father. Historically, this is all the government cared about. Otherwise, the government's got no business getting involved in who you love, who you spend time with, who you have a relationship with. Let's go further. When you redefine marriage, you render it meaningless. When you redefine marriage, you render it meaningless. Here, watch this. 2 + 2 = 4. That is math, not spelling. Cat is spelled C-A-T. That is spelling and not math. If I suddenly say that math is spelling and spelling is math, if I say that north is south and east is west, communication becomes worthless. When I asked on campus, which way is the Denny building, and people pointed me over here, and I still went into the wrong building. But if Denny building became Macy or Barnard or whatever, then the directions become meaningless. Now stay with me on this. Once you redefine marriage, you render it meaningless. Fundamental definitions of words. In human history, there is no society in which marriage simply meant the union of two people, even in societies in which homosexuality was celebrated. Marriage was still something different. Marriage was about a man and a woman. Even where you had gay relations that were open, that were even celebrated. Words have meaning. You can't just go and change it. So even in cases of polygamous marriage always requires a man and a woman. So check this out. This is in England. I noted this already in 2013, but it is reality in England. As England moves forward towards redefining marriage, which they've done now, the Daily Telegraph reported that the word husband will in future be applied to women, and the word wife will refer to men. The government has decided. According to John Bingham, civil servants have overruled the Oxford English Dictionary and hundreds of years of common usage, effectively abolishing the traditional meaning of the words for spouses. So if you have two men marrying, one can be the husband and the other can be the wife. You can have a male wife in England by law. If you have two women marrying, then one of them would be the husband. So you can have a female husband and a male wife. Words themselves become meaningless. This is reality. I'm not making this up. This is reality. How about male mothers and female fathers? According to a bill passed in the California Assembly in May 2014, and by a vote of 51-13 at that, California, no surprise, women could be designated as the father on birth certificates, while men could be designated as mother. What was the reason for such an insane piece of legislation? It was done to modernize the definition of the family to reflect same-sex unions. So if you have a lesbian couple on the birth certificate bringing a baby into the world, well, one is the mother, one can choose to be the father. So you can have a female father. And then if it's two men and they're on the birth certificate for the baby, then one of them can be the mother and the other the father. So what we then have is, well, tell you what, I'll come back to marriage vows in a minute. What you have is this then. What you have is a society in which not only is marriage redefined, but the terms related to it are redefined. So you can be a male wife, a female husband, a male mother, a female father. By the way, I was shocked here in the year 2015 to come onto this campus and find it so sexist. You actually have bathrooms that say men and women. I mean, that is so sexist. That is so gender binary. Distressing to see. Well, of course, that's being challenged as well for other reasons. Everything should be gender neutral. Look, it is the law now in California. It is the law that if you are a guy and you identify as a girl, then you can play on the girls' sports team and use the girls' locker room. And it's been done. I don't have it in my slides, but I'd show you a picture of a 17-year-old guy who plays on the girls' softball team and uses the girls' locker room. Well, why not? If it's what you perceive. Everything then becomes meaningless. I talked to some people at a rally in Charlotte some months ago, and I asked them, if I believe I'm a horse, can I use the stable? The lady said, yes, you're not hurting anybody. Then I had a lengthy discussion with a young African-American man, very, very clear-headed, very literate, and I said, if I identify as black, to the core of my being, I believe I'm black. Am I black? He said, no, that's different. I said, why is that different? And finally, he admitted, if I believe I'm black, I'm black. He said to me, what you do in the hospitals is primitive, basing gender on biology and chromosomes. That's primitive. Gender, he said, is not what's between your legs, it's what's between your ears. So Bruce Jenner is Woman of the Year, and Rachel Dolezal is black. Why not? This is where things go, and it's all part of words have no meaning anymore. Male doesn't mean male, female doesn't mean female. Just becomes words. Let's go a little further. Marriage, I mentioned what heterosexuals have done to it. So you think of it. These days, no problem to live together outside of wedlock, right? No problem having kids together outside of wedlock. No problem getting married, and when you're not happy with the marriage, a month later, getting divorced. And now, marriage can mean two men or two women, a male bride, a female groom. One lesbian couple got married and pronounced themselves bride and broom as a variation of groom. One of them chose to be broom. So I have potential wedding vows for the future. Why not? Well, this is with the man speaking, but why not? I take you as my wife, but probably not for life. I take you as my own, but not just you alone. I pledge myself to you, and perhaps to others too. I take you as my bride, although your name is Clyde. Why not? Tell me why not. Tell me why this couldn't go. Oh, hang on. If it's not the union of a man and a woman, why not other variants? Why not human plus this? There's a woman married a dog in India. Why not? If marriage is no longer the union of a man and woman, it now just becomes mystically, for no reason in history or constitution or logic, union of two people. Why does it require two people? Can't you love others than people? How about the woman in England who married a dog? How about the woman in India who married a snake? How about the woman in Israel who married a dolphin? I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. How about Erica Eiffel? She married the Eiffel Tower. I'm not kidding you. Look, there's a documentary down there. It's called Object Fetish. She did it, but why not? Love is love. How about the man who wanted to marry his computer? This is what he said. All of his porn is on his MacBook. He has a sexual relation with his computer. This was his argument. If gays are allowed to marry, then so should other sexual minorities. Now listen, please understand me. I am sure that there are gay couples who would lay down their lives for each other. I'm sure that there are gay couples who passionately love each other and are committed to each other. I'm not comparing their relationship to the relationship of a woman with a dog or a man with a snake or a woman with the Eiffel Tower or a man with his computer. I'm simply saying once you redefine marriage, you render it meaningless and anything goes. Why do you think we have more and more of this marriage nonsense to all these other things? And this guy, he's obviously got some problems, but he based his argument on if two gays can marry, then why can't I marry my computer? Because marriage has now been fundamentally redefined. And if you differ with me, please give me one reason to limit it to two and to limit it to humans. Another question. Will gay marriage transform heterosexual marriage? There are some gay activists who said you better believe it will. You better believe it will. Alex de Tocqueville, maybe you've heard of his famous book on democracy in America. French scholar came over to America, observed our country for a period of months and wrote a classic book about his observations from the 1830s. And he said this, America is certainly the country where the bonds of marriage are most respected and where the concept of conjugal bliss has its highest and truest expression. In Europe, almost all social disorder stems from disturbances at home and not far removed from the marriage bed. These men come to feel scorn for natural ties and legitimate pleasures. There they develop a liking for disorder, a restless spirit, and fluctuating desires. The American draws the love of order from his home, which he then carries over into his affairs of state. So what happens on a societal level when marriage is fundamentally transformed? Well-known gay activist Dan Savage, the one who launched the It Gets Better campaign, this is what he says about being monogamish. He says, forget monogamy, that doesn't work. You should be monogamish. He said, monogamy is ridiculous and people aren't any good at it and they're not wired for it. We didn't evolve to be. It's not natural and it places a tremendous strain on our marriages and our long-term commitment to expect them to be effortlessly monogamous. A few years ago, Dan Savage said that he and his partner had had flings with at least 9 other men. All consensual threesomes, but he said that's the key to preserving long-term relationships. Not monogamy, but being monogamish. Listen to what Professor Jay Michelson had to say. The future of marriage, in fact, again, he's a gay author and professor. The future of marriage, in fact, may turn out to be a lot like the Christian right's nightmare. A sex-positive, body-affirming compact between two adults that allows for a wide range of intimate and emotional experience, meaning with each other or with others. Maybe no one will be the husband, as in animal husbandry, and no one the chattel. Maybe instead of jealousy, non-monogamous couples will cultivate compersion to take pleasure in their partner's sexual delight. And most dangerously, maybe marriage will be only one of many forms of such a compact. Maybe people will choose their own intimate futures without coercion from the state. The horror. He's mocking that. Oh yeah, that's going to be so bad. Let marriage be transformed, he's saying, and let it be one of many, many different options. He said, I do like the notion of same-sex marriage as a liberation gateway drug. Like pot serves as a gateway drug for other drugs historically. So let same-sex marriage be a liberation gateway drug to completely wreck and rock heterosexual marriage. My words. Inclusion of LGBT people within institutions like marriage will eventually transform those institutions, just as including women, non-whites, non-Anglos, and non-Christians has done. No, actually, hasn't transformed marriage. when we had the horrific statute in America that whites couldn't marry blacks, you know when the court ruled to throw that out? They said, of course they can marry because they can procreate. In other words, that's what defined the relationship, and all you need is a man and a woman to come together. That was part of the Supreme Court decision on that matter. But you don't transform marriage by saying black and white can marry. You don't transform marriage by saying Catholic and not Catholic can marry. You transform marriage by saying it can be two men or two women. That's what transforms it. And Jay Michelson's saying there's a whole lot more it's going to transform. The experience and perspectives of LGBT people are different from those of straight people, and different in a good way. So if I had to predict, I'd go with a gradual realization of the conservative nightmare. Only it won't be a nightmare. And plenty of straight people will thank us for it. Yeah, it'd be so liberating for my wife and I, married almost 40 years, if we could just be monogamous. Oh, that'd be just great. What a celebration. How that would enhance our intimacy and our love and our commitment. Listen, I'm a New York Jew. Sarcasm runs in my blood, just to explain that. Jewish follower of Jesus, but just to explain the sarcasm. Maybe gays will preserve marriage precisely by redefining, expanding, and reforming it. And maybe then it can be palatable to progressives as one of a multitude of options. Wow. Pioneer gay activist Jack Nichols. Non-procreative same-sex relationships have a particularly redeeming quality, namely that they take place between people who are the same and can therefore, theoretically at least, welcome others into affectional relationships that bypass exclusivity. This, conceivably, could promote a maximization of affection through communal contact, replacing today's failing models of exclusive, neurotic, narrow, monogamous duos. Yes, they're saying marriage should be transformed. What about the children? What about the children? Now, you'll read some surveys that say that kids raised by same-sex parents do just as well in every respect as those raised by heterosexual parents. Most of those studies are terribly flawed, rely on short data, and many of them ask the wrong questions. When you ask the right questions, you get very, very different results. Common sense would tell you that. You separate a child from their mother or father by choice. No, a person did not choose to be same-sex attracted. A person did not choose to be homosexual. They choose to act on it or live things out. But yeah, I understand. This is not something you wake up one day and say, yeah, I think I'm just going to be gay. You may have young kids, they're confused and they don't understand what they're saying, and now I'm going to come out as gay, and the next day take it back. One middle school teacher told me about it, the 12-year-old boy in her class. He came out as gay one day, the next day came to her and said, I think I made a mistake, can I take that back? But we're not talking about that. We're talking about an adult who's same-sex attracted. They didn't choose that, but if they choose to bring a child into the world to raise with their partner, they're willfully saying, by choice, I am separating two gay men. I am separating that child from its mother for life. Two gay women. I am separating that child from its father by choice for life. So how can that be in the best interest of the child? Simple, honest question. Children from fatherless homes, and I'm not comparing this to a gay family, I'm just saying, look at this data. Frank Turek in his book, Correct, Not Politically Correct, says this, and this data is widely accessible. Children from fatherless homes are 7 times more likely to live in poverty, 6 times more likely to commit suicide, more than twice as likely to commit crime, more than twice as likely to become pregnant out of wedlock, worse off academically and socially, worse off physically and emotionally when they reach adulthood. Break it down differently. They represent 60% of America's rapists, 63% of America's youth suicides, 70% of America's long-term prison inmates, 70% of America's reform school attendees, 71% of America's teenage pregnancies, 71% of America's high school dropouts, 72% of America's adolescent murderers, 85% of America's youth prisoners, 85% of America's youth with behavioral disorders, 90% of America's runaways. My heart goes out to kids that have had 2 strikes against them from early on in their lives. I'll be taking questions at the end so you can make a note of anything you want to ask me or challenge. Now here's the point. I'm not saying that these stats apply in same-sex households. No, not at all. I'm simply saying that the absence of a father, yes, some of this ties in with poverty and other things, but when you level it all out, the absence of a father is very negative. The absence of a mother is very negative. Think of you, just young ladies, going through changes in your life, different things you've been through. The presence of a female in your life is very important. And listen, the world's best dad, talking about heterosexuals, the world's best dad is not a mom, and the world's best mom is not a dad. And it's the same for gay couples as well. So we have this massive social experiment taking place, and you should read the stories of gay kids. You should read the stories of kids raised by gay parents who talk about what they're lacking. Some of them are fiercely loyal to their moms or to their dads, fiercely loyal. But they'll say now that they're married with kids, they cannot believe what they were deprived of a dad or deprived of a mom growing up. You should listen to their stories too. What about children of anonymous sperm donors? You're going to have a massively higher percentage of this with gay couples. Massively higher, obviously. Major report was released in 2010. My Daddy's Name is Donor, a new study of young adults conceived through sperm donation. On average, according to the report, young adults conceived through sperm donation are hurting more, are more confused, and feel more isolated from their families. They fare worse than their peers raised by biological parents on important outcomes such as depression, delinquency, and substance abuse. Nearly 2/3 agree my sperm donor is half of who I am. So you are guaranteeing now that kids are raised, and there's a big part of them, they don't know who mom is. They don't know who dad is. And in most cases, they could well be separated for life. And in many cases, they have no way of finding out. You want to read some stories. You want to be sympathetic to people. You want to talk about love. Go to the website anonymousus.org. Anonymousus.org. It is children of sperm donors putting their stories there. More than half of these kids say that when they see someone who resembles them, they wonder if they're related. Almost as many say they have feared being attracted to or having sexual relations with someone to whom they are unknowingly related. It happened in Australia now. A small community with a number of lesbians living there, and it turned out that they used the same sperm bank, and it turned out once they started having kids that they realized that they used the same sperm donor. And now there's confusion about these kids going together. They could be incestuous relationships. This is not the way it's supposed to be. This is not in the best interest of kids. And again, the government is not obligated to sanction your relationship with someone. The government is not obligated to put their stamp on it just because you love someone. The government is looking at bigger societal issues. Here's a poem from anonymousus.org. Uncertainty is killing me. This is what a young lady wrote to the dad she doesn't know. Who are you? Will I pass you in the street? Will you hold the door for me and smile as I walk into a gas station during my travels? Will you look at me and wonder if I belong to you? You have the pleasure of knowing I could be here. For 19 years, I was denied of knowing you even existed. What was my grandmother, your mother, like? What about my grandfather, your father? Why do you get to selfishly keep them all to yourself? Who are you to deny me half of my family tree? Branches rich and strong with stories I may never be told. Who are you to give away my heritage knowing it will be replaced with something false? Do I have brothers and sisters with my dark hair and my deep brown eyes? Will I be attracted to a familiar stranger in my classes? Will I fall in love with him and kiss him passionately in an act of accidental incest? Have you told your wife? Have you told your partner? What about your children? Have you told your brothers and sisters about their mysterious niece? Are you dead? Will you ever read this? Have you dismissed it as something in your past that you did to make ends meet? Did they pay you to give me away? What did you spend the money on? Did you buy a sparkly necklace for your ex-girlfriend? Did you buy books? The bank you went to would have paid you half of my college algebra book for the donation that included me. Did you buy a candy bar at a gas station? Was I worth it? Do you miss me? Do you ever think of me? Do I even cross your mind? Does the uncertainty drive you crazy? Was it worth it? Do you wonder when my birthday is? What color gown I wore to my graduation? Would you be proud to know that I was the valedictorian of my senior class? Would you support that I'm Christian? Would you even want me in your life? I want you in mine. I'll accept anything about you if I could just get the privilege of knowing who you are, of knowing who my family is. Same-sex relationships, by choice, produce an epidemic of kids just like that. It's an undeniable truth. And if you really care about people, you think about your peers. And lastly, redefining marriage brings a real threat to religious liberties, a real and genuine threat. Let me just quote from the 4 dissenting Supreme Court justices. Consider what they had to say. Chief Justice Roberts. Today's decision, June 26th decision, for example, creates serious questions about religious liberty. Many good and decent people oppose same-sex marriage as a tenet of faith, and their freedom to exercise religion is, unlike the right imagined by the majority, meaning the other 5 justices, actually spelled out in the Constitution, Amendment 1. Our nation was founded on freedom of religion. You take that away, you take away a foundation of our nation. Not a theocracy where you impose your views. For example, everyone has to observe the Sabbath or they get stoned to death. That would be a theocracy. We're not advocating that, God forbid. But our nation was founded on religious liberty. In fact, our founding fathers expected Americans to be a moral and religious people. Otherwise, they knew that a democracy like this could not survive. You take away this, you take away our most fundamental freedom in America. Justice Scalia. Today's decree says that my ruler and the ruler of 320 million Americans coast to coast is a majority of the 9 lawyers on the Supreme Court. This practice of constitutional revision by an unelected committee of 9, always accompanied as it is today by extravagant praise of liberty, robs the people of the most important liberty they asserted in the Declaration of Independence and won in the Revolution of 1776, the freedom to govern themselves. In other words, you can't even let states decide on this. The Supreme Court is just going to make its decree. And look at what he says. A system of government that makes the people subordinate to a committee of 9 unelected lawyers does not deserve to be called a democracy. Justice Thomas. Aside from undermining the political processes that protect our liberty, the majority's decision threatens the religious liberty our nation has long sought to protect. It appears all but inevitable that the two will come into conflict, particularly as individuals and churches are confronted with demands to participate in and endorse civil marriages between same-sex couples. Could you imagine going into a Jewish photographer and saying, hey, we're getting married on Saturday, and we want you to shoot our wedding, and he says, no, I'm a religious Jew, I don't work on the Sabbath, and you take him to court, and the court finds him guilty of discrimination? Could you imagine going into a Muslim caterer and you tell that caterer, we hear you're the best in the city, we also want some pork at our wedding. He says, no, we're Muslim, we can't do that. And you take him to court and he's found guilty because of discrimination. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine going to a Christian photographer and you open up a new porn magazine in your city and you say, hey, I hear you're the best in the city and we want to do a porn shoot with one of our best gals, and they said, sorry, we're Christian, we can't do that. Could you imagine taking them to court and the court finds them guilty of discrimination? But today, if it's 2 men or 2 women who walk in and say, we'd like you to shoot our wedding, they said, no, we can't because of our Christian conviction, they can lose their business. They can be fined, they can potentially go to jail. This is not just an idle threat, it's happening across the country. And there are even gay activists speaking up against it, saying, no, they should have their freedom. I saw a passionate Facebook post by a gay baker who was getting angry with other gays and lesbians in the city, saying, listen, here's a baker, you go in there, you say, we're 2 men, we want a wedding cake, and they say, hey, we're Christian, we don't believe that wedding is 2 men or 2 women. He said, go to another baker. There are plenty of other bakers in the city. Go to another baker. That's perfectly fine. It's not hardship on anybody. It's their loss of business. And if people don't want to go do business with them, fine. But right now, the conflict has risen to the point that sexual liberties win out over religious liberties. That's disaster for America. You watch and see. That's disaster. And then Justice Alito. It will be used to vilify Americans who are unwilling to assent to the new orthodoxy. I assume that those who cling to old beliefs will be able to whisper their thoughts in the recesses of their home, but if they repeat those views in public, they will risk being labeled as bigots and treated as such by governments, employers, and schools. So I get blasted all the time by different people because of viewpoints that I hold to on a wide range of issues. I'll do my best to present them in a civil and respectful way, and then we'll have discussion. Nonetheless, I get blasted. But immediately after the Supreme Court decision, I saw it just get ramped up. I was now the target. So, I mean, this is typical. And these are the ones I can post that don't have profanity and death threats and death wishes in them, okay? This was on my Twitter feed. Immediately after the Supreme Court ruling, move to the moon, religious terrorist and hater. We don't want you here anymore. Supreme Court has ruled, out with your kind. It's the law now, right? How about on another post? Christian hater riffraff like Dr. Michael Brown, list those must be brought to justice. Zero tolerance for this scum. Bring us to justice. Throw us in jail. Maybe even string us up. My Facebook page. God's design for Christian haters is to end up in prison. This is what people are talking about. You are now codified as a bigot if you hold to Christian beliefs or Jewish beliefs, traditional Jewish beliefs, or just the historic definition of marriage. You deserve a prison or go to the moon. How about this one? What a pathetic example of humanity, your opinion, and those who follow you portray. Small-mindedness is unacceptable at this stage of age. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. And then the one above it, ignorant bigot. Of course, they misspelled bigot, but that happens sometimes. So, in conclusion, same-sex marriage is definitely regress, not progress. And here's the solution. The only reason the government's involved in marriage is because of the benefits that marriage conveys on society, which can only be done in a heterosexual home for many, many reasons. Let the government stay out of. Two gay people want to, quote, be married. That's their business. They go to a church ceremony, or 3 or 8 or whatever. They want to be blessed. They want to live together. That's between them and God, as long as they're not breaking laws. But we have definitely gone in the wrong direction, and we must reverse the tide, if not for a generational impact that will be entirely negative on America. Okay, having said that, it's time for questions. Now, let me just say this. For those of you that really differed with me, assuming there's some of you at least that do, thanks for being self-controlled. Body language was one thing, but that's fine. Thanks for being self-controlled. I do appreciate that. Sometimes it's frustrating, or you want to protest or yell out something. So thank you for being respectful. So here's what we're going to do. We don't have a mic to hand out. All right, we don't have security guards to tackle you if you get unruly. So we're just expecting the same mutual respect as we interact. So I'm just going to ask you, if you have a question, raise your hand where you are and stand up. We don't have mics though, so we just need you to project so everybody can hear, all right? And do your best to actually raise a question. In other words, this is not your time for the opposite lecture. Feel free to get a few folks and give an opposite lecture, or if this ever gets on YouTube, then put your own YouTube out and critique it throughout, interrupt mine and jump in and critique it. But if you have a question, that's what this is for, and we may interact a little on it. But this time for Q&A, if we only have a few people that want to ask questions and some want to go a second or third time, that's perfectly fine, all right? So any questions, you may agree with me but need clarification. Any questions that relate to the subject matter at hand? All right, then we're done. Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
All right, you said that interracial relationships, they're allowed. The reason they're allowed is predicated upon their ability to procreate, and that doesn't follow through, because sterile couples have always been allowed to marry. There's nothing to stop a heteromantic asexual couple from marrying, even though they won't have sex or they can't produce children.
Yeah. So thanks for the question. First, to clarify, I said that was part of the Supreme Court ruling in Loving versus Virginia. Part of the Supreme Court's ruling is to say there's no basis for forbidding marriage to an interracial couple. It's because the fundamental definition of marriage is the ability to procreate, which only heterosexuals can do. In other words, it's not looking at the exception to the rule. We're talking about an exception. A sterile couple, an older couple, etc., or a hetero-romantic asexual couple, as you said. Those are all the exceptions. All it's looking at is the rule, which is only heterosexuals can reproduce. So if you have a man and a woman, they can be interracial. That doesn't matter. So all I was citing was the Supreme Court decision. Part of the rationale in the Loving versus Virginia decision was that interracial couples can procreate. Therefore, it's part of the definition of marriage. So simply that. But again, I think we'll all agree that only heterosexuals can procreate. That you have to have a male and a female in order to have a child. So that excludes all other categories. It doesn't exclude anyone within heterosexuality. That's an exception to that, because the rule is based on the law. So, for example, I'm sure NASCAR drivers can safely drive over the speed limit, but the speed limit is set for the norm for everyone. But I was simply referring directly to the Loving versus Virginia decision regarding that. Yes, sir?
So if the population were to be such that heterosexuals were the minority, then the law should reflect that, and the minority of heterosexual people shouldn't have a say in marriage laws?
Has nothing to do with minority or majority. It has to do with the definition of marriage.
If they're the minority, they'd be the exception.
No. It has to do with the definition of marriage and then exceptions within that. The definition of marriage has always tied in with the ability to procreate. That's why you have a male and female. So it comes back to the question, if it's not male and female, why should it be only two people? Why is two the magic number? Why does Justice Kennedy refer to two throughout if it's not the union of a male and female? Yes, sir.
Right. The reason why a marriage is more than one human person is because it is functional in that two people can share custody rights, property rights.
But three also could, correct?
Yeah,
Three could as well.
Three would be fine, except that the nuclear family is so highly stressed in our culture from Kennedy that people.
But maybe adding 3 or 4 would make it easier. But you're saying there's no reason to keep it to 2. You need more than one.
The only reason to keep it to 2 is that people are jealous, and some people are not built for
That's
monogamy.
very small-minded. You are just judging the polyamorous and the polygamous from your own limited worldview, sexist, jealous worldview. I'm having fun here, okay? But sexist, jealous worldview, and saying others. What about Jay Michelson saying we have to overcome the jealousies and things like that? So the point is simple. You have no good legal reason to keep it to 2. And a throuple and polyamorous families have every good reason to say to you, you're being bigoted towards their relationships. So tell you what, we'll come back. All right. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Okay, you spent a lot of time focusing on the childbearing aspect. So you're saying when you get married, you have to have children because when you get married, now you don't want to have children. Your marriage not legitimate.
No, I'm not saying that you have to have children to be married. I'm saying the only reason the government gets involved in marriage is because this is the institution that produces children for the next generation and joins children to the mother and father. Only heterosexual couples can do that. You have exceptions to that rule, and anybody can live together that wants to live together legally in America. No one's going to stop them. And gay couples can live together, and they can make whatever kind of legal arrangements they want. They have the liberty to do that. Just don't call it marriage if you're going to redefine it. But look, historically,
you call it marriage because you're married to someone that you love, you care about, and that you're following your heart. You're not following what society wants you to do. So you're saying therefore it can't be legitimate.
What was it? Say this again. Marriage is what?
So because you're following your heart, you marry for love, and love doesn't know gender or race or anything of that nature. Our government, our society sees that. So therefore, how can you say it's not marriage in the eyes of our government to that person, to that couple? They are
because
married.
the government has nothing to do with who you love. So you agree your argument holds just as well for 8 people or for 2 brothers. Can you give me any reason why 2 adult brothers should not be able to love, if they love each other? And there are cases like this. I mean, I can give you actual quotes of actual examples and some cases have gone to court arguing for this. But can you give me any good reason based on marriage just being who you love and want to spend time with? And love doesn't see gender, love doesn't see race, love doesn't see sexual orientation, right? So if you had a gay brother and you're 25 years old and you love each other and want to spend the rest of your lives together, can you give me any good reason the government should not recognize that as marriage? You can't. So once you start playing with these things, you start playing with societal taboos, family boundaries, and walls. That's the whole thing. It now becomes meaningless. It could be any definition of almost anything, and the government has no business getting involved with that except to be practical and pragmatic. So let people have their relationships if they're not breaking the law, but we can't call it marriage. Yes, sir. Just need you to project so we can all hear you, okay?
Absolutely. Something important about the connection with race, which tends to come up, like loving Virginia, interracial marriage. Misogyny was the law that was up for grabs here. Anti-misogyny laws was saying that blacks are an inferior breed of humanity than whites. And that is why it should be forbidden for them on pseudoscientific grounds to kind of make a mongrel race, which is how these laws kind of came up in the books, particularly in the South. Most states, first of all, did not have those laws. So it's not exactly the same thing as a kind of gay marriage sort of thing. Most societies on earth didn't care what your ethnicity was if you were married. It was more about your religion, your culture, and your ability to have the marriage. So what, certain states having this idea that races should not mix on evolutionary grounds, that was what was contested, and that what a lot of the evidence that was brought forth was from the social sciences. So the social sciences demonstrated that black intelligence is equal to white intelligence, or lack thereof. It's not a matter of race. You can have a mixed child. That child is fully able to grow or not grow. And so I would
And
say
it requires
that,
no fundamental redefinition of the
I would
meaning of
say
marriage.
then if we were to use the same methodology, just to take a, let's say, legal and social scientific approach to this issue, can we say the same thing about, as you mentioned, heterosexuals having unprotected sex, they're married, and they're monogamous? Is that the same thing as homosexuals having unprotected sex and they're monogamous? Is the same sociological and medical outcomes come out of that, or does one have better outcomes than the other?
Right, and one again has outcomes that concern the government, which
And
is
that's,
the
I
ability to
think,
procreate.
you know, just from a neutral point of view, I think
Mhm.
that's also a way to help provide context. And when it's a very contentious issue, you cannot really argue that you get the same exact outcomes.
Exactly. So let's just say, look at this very simple, okay? If you had 10 committed gay couples and you put them on an island, and that island had the best stores, the best hospitals, the best resources, but it's just 10 gay couples, okay? And here, let's make it more simple. You've just got trees and fruit and cattle and all that. You can sustain yourself there. If you come back 100 years later, there's nobody there, there's nothing there. Can't be, right? Because ultimately they die out. You have 10 couples, gay couples, they're exclusively homosexual. 100 years later, there's nobody there. You put 10 heterosexual couples on the same island, and you come back 100 years later and you've got a growing civilization. The outcome is just different, and again, the government is not looking at an individual exception or who you love or don't love. And if we want to break down relationships, gay men quite openly, advocates like Jay Michelson and Dan Savage, quite openly talk about being monogamous. It is understood that a woman has a certain tempering effect on a man. It happens in relationships. You watch it, and now you are in a relationship and raising children. It affects you. It is known, hey, men tend to be more oversexed than women, all right? Men tend to be, there's a lot more epidemic of men raping women on campus than women raping men on campus. You add man plus man, you do not have the same tempering effect. That's why you have widely distributed surveys, and I mean, the New York Times has written about it, others, where 75% of gay male couples say, of course we have open relationships, of course we bring others in as well. So you're still not talking about same being compared to same. Yes, ma'am?
When you were talking about if we can marry the same sex, why not animals or objects like the computer?
Once you redefine marriage,
Right. And so, what do you think about the issue with all of that being consent? Like, a dog can't give consent, a computer can't give consent. So that is what separates that's what separates the dog or the objects from humans, is that there's no consent there.
Yeah, well, the first thing is, again, to make clear, I'm not comparing the relationships.
Right.
Right? I want to make that totally clear. But who's to say a dog can't, I mean, unless you need a paw print or something like that on a document, but for a dog to express affection towards someone or desire to spend time with someone, why can't that be consent?
Is it verbal?
Well, who said it has to be verbal? What if it's a...
What consent is, I mean, that's the big issue with sexual assault, is giving verbal consent. For example, that's just like...
Yeah, no, I understand.
But the Eiffel Tower can say, yes, I want to marry you and no one else, you know?
But
So
love is
how
love.
does
It's
that-
about the woman's love. So you're telling the woman that she can't love because the love cannot be legally reciprocated.
Well, because I'm not saying she can't love them, I'm just saying she can't marry them if they can't also give consent, since marriage is between...
Between what? Between a man and a woman. See, the thing is...
No, I didn't say man and woman.
No,
I said
I know.
one person.
But the point has been, marriage has always been between a man and a woman through history. Even in societies that celebrated homosexuality, that was something outside of marriage. Now you're just saying it's between any two people consensually. That's what I'm trying to find out. Where did that definitional change come in? If you could change it that fundamental, that it's not a man plus a woman, it's any two people. Well, why does it have to be any two people?
Well, because, I mean, I don't know, I'm not speaking for anybody.
Right.
Personally, I believe that a big part of marriage or a relationship, sex, stuff like that, it relies on verbal So
Right.
that's like.
Well, I'm not arguing, I'm not denying that it relies on, that consent is important. And of course, you have the horrific thing that's thankfully being shouted out on campuses about the lack of consent and what's in all the abuse. I mean, it's terrible to see that here we are today facing these things. But my point is this: why not redefine it one more step? We've just radically changed it from what it's always been, the union of a man and a woman. Now it's the union of any two people, the consensual union of any two people. Well, why not go one step further and say it doesn't have to be consent? If the animal can't give consent, if the Eiffel Tower can't give consent, why can't we just redefine it? That's my whole point. Why are they calling it marriage? It's because marriage has become meaningless the more that it gets redefined. That's the whole point. I fully agree. Of course consent is required. But the point is, once you redefine it, tell all these people that it's not marriage, and they'll cause some kind of phobic, something. Yes, sir?
All right, so I have a serious question.
Yeah, well, these have all been serious questions.
All right, so what is your research behind this? Because everybody knows like Albert Kinsey and how Albert Kinsey like experiments to know about sex and stuff like that. So where do you get your research to actually talk about all this? Because I mainly heard about like other people's information and like this website of information. How do you know these things for fact?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate all the questions, by the way. And I don't take anything as mocking or feel free to challenge to the hill, okay? So Alfred Kinsey, in his 1948 study on the sexuality of the human male, he becomes Time Magazine's Man of the Year. And it's a travesty when you stop and think for a minute that he has information on how long it takes for a baby to have an orgasm. Where they get this information from? Americans didn't stop and say, where's this coming from? I mean, he got material, he got information from pedophiles. And then he got a lot of information from prison population. So he came up with the skewed idea that 1 in 10 is gay. Gay activists for years and years have known those figures are not accurate. So the most recent study, Centers of Disease Control, added questions with the request of gay and lesbian organizations. They added questions to their surveys. These are done anonymously. You get information directly from the people. And they did a massive survey, the biggest of its kind ever done in America, as to how many identify as gay and lesbian. 1.6%, less than 1 in 50. When you add in those who identify as bisexual, 2.3%. At the same time, a major governmental study was done in the UK. They got the exact same data, 1.6% identified as gay or lesbian. So basically, what I do is this. My doctorate was in Near Eastern languages and literatures, which meant studying ancient languages, Babylonian, Assyrian, Phoenician, Arabic, or Hebrew, whatever, and reading the actual texts, not what people said about the texts or their speculation, but the actual texts. So I'm always text-based. That's how I learned to do my research. So I do my best to go to the original data and then to look at as many different studies as possible, and then to see where you'll have those who differ with me citing those same studies as authoritative. For example, in the Lawrence v. Texas Supreme Court decision, gay activist organizations took a bunch of studies, and in their argument to the court, they said something like 2.3 or 2.4% of the population identified as gay or lesbian. This was in their own brief. So, and Kinsey, of course, by the way, this study is like, read the, I don't know how big the book is, I've got it at home, 900,000 page book. He was a known sexual pervert. I mean, in every way. Apparently, his death was due to sadomasochistic sexual things he did to himself that partly led to his death, according to reports that I've heard. So his stuff has been known to be debunked for years and years and years. But here's the deal. You're going to have different studies that are competing studies. So you have those who are statisticians and others examine them, and then you do your best to sift through the data. But look, you'll have the two top scholars in your university may differ on a scientific issue based on different papers and studies. So you do your best to try to find stuff that gives common denominator truth as best as you can. You got to get past a lot of the headlines, because on all sides it gets misreported.
All right, so my thing is, do you have any proof of your own research that you actually asked these people, like on two parents of the same sex, how they actually grew up and how they feel about it, and like all these other topics you brought up instead of what you have brought up just now? Like, do you actually have this stuff to back it up with?
So let me give you a threefold answer. Number one, there are many, many studies that have been done recently that have claimed that kids raised in same-sex households in all ways come out just the same as kids raised in heterosexual households. Others, however, have really carefully analyzed those and showed wrong questions were asked, insufficient statistical banks were used, and I have testimony from gay and lesbian activists saying, oh yeah, we knew that it didn't come out the same. For example, kids raised in same-sex households have a higher percentage themselves of having gender identity confusion, have a higher percentage of sexual experimentation, and a higher percentage of identifying as gay or lesbian as they grow up. But the gay activists said we knew about these results but didn't consider them negative in any way. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part is I've read the stories of those who say it was great and wonderful, and you know, I grew up wonderfully well, and my 2 moms were incredible, or my 2 dads were incredible. Of course, they can't compare that to a heterosexual home because they didn't grow up in that. But I've gotten plenty of direct stories and have read the studies of those who talk about the disastrous and negative effects. There are a number of kids raised in same-sex households who presented their evidence to the Supreme Court in this decision. I was speaking at a pastor's meeting a few months ago, and a young woman there said that she was raised by her 2 lesbian moms. She was a foster kid, given up for adoption, and they took in 3 girls. All 3 girls ended up identifying as lesbian. That was the first thing. And I said, she's a former lesbian herself. She no longer is a lesbian. I asked her, what was the attitude in your household towards men? She said, oh, we did not like men. We did not like men. It's well known that there are enough lesbian women who have been abused or hurt by men over the years, who have been, whether it's sexually assaulted or other things, and their attitude towards men is not the best. Well, how are you, just use common sense here. You grow up in a same-sex home. You have 2 moms, 2 dads. How do you learn how a man treats a woman? How a woman treats a man? How do you learn the role of the dad through the mom's pregnancy? You get 2 men, you're raising a girl, she's going through her changes, she's picking out her dresses, her body's changing. Which of them talks to her based on his own experience? They don't, they can't. So there are now more and more stories of those who call themselves queer spawn, where they will talk about the horror stories, the difficulties. In my book, A Queer Thing Happened to America, which is over here, it's 700 pages with 1,500 endnotes. You'll find ample data along with lots of personal stories and anecdotes. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a definition of marriage that I would like to propose, but before I say that, I would like to give kind of an idea or question about how you said redefining marriage limits marriage and kind of debunks it as a whole.
Yeah, redefining it makes it meaningless. It
Yes.
doesn't limit it, it does the opposite.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So when in American history, when the idea of citizenship decided to be changed, but growing from just landowning white men to now basically anyone who is born here or has worked here a certain amount of time, does that make citizenship meaningless in the same way that growing the definition of marriage makes that meaningless?
No, that's a great question. Citizenship was just a particular way that it was defined in this particular culture. It had nothing to do with all of history, what citizenship was. In plenty of cultures, citizenship didn't even exist as a concept, whereas marriage has been the one thing that every culture has had. Marriage has been the one thing that you can go from all around the world. I've traveled around the world in the most obscure different places. You still have the fundamental thing of a man and woman coming together and generating a family. So you're dealing with one thing that is historic and not just an abstract definition, whereas citizenship, this was an abstract definition based on particular parameters. So yes, some of the meaning may have been changed at some level, but it didn't. There's no historic fundamental definition to it to go by. Yes, sir.
What would you say? I saw a lot of posts on social media around the time that the Supreme Court law passed making gay marriage and LGBT marriage legal. A lot of people were saying, even Christians were saying, well, even though we don't agree with that it's moral, we we don't want to force our beliefs on other people, and we need to separate church and state. If we say that we should allow gay marriage to be legal because otherwise that would be forcing our beliefs on other people.
Yeah, so again, all these questions are good questions and fair questions. The first thing is it a matter of forcing our beliefs on anyone or simply advocating for what we believe is best? For example, I'm strongly pro-life. I don't believe that I have the right to physically stop a woman from having an abortion. I don't have the right to blow up an abortion clinic, God forbid. But I will do everything I can to vote for pro-life candidates and to advocate for pro-life position because we have a republic here and we can vote in a democratic way. It's not a matter of forcing our beliefs on others. It's a matter of challenging a fundamental redefinition as unconstitutional, as many legal scholars have now done. It's a matter then of this being imposed on everyone else because this is now what's happened. And it's a matter of the Supreme Court doesn't have the power to make a law. It's up to Congress now to make a law. It wasn't that long ago, John McCain, who's fairly a liberal Republican, you'd say, or certainly not a hyper-conservative, that he said that if the Supreme Court ever ruled in this way, that Congress would immediately strike it down. So there hasn't even been a proper balance of powers. So no, we as Christians cannot now tell someone the court wrote that document, but it doesn't exist, or when you were pronounced husband and husband or whatever it was, that it doesn't exist. I don't personally recognize it as marriage. That's my choice. And if you came to my place of business, if I was a baker, you wanted me to bake a cake for the two men coming together, I couldn't do that in good conscience. I might be penalized for it, but that's the consequence. So I'm not going to recognize it. I'm not going to celebrate it. A lesbian caller to my radio show was saying, look, you should celebrate it because look at I said, look, I know you're in tears of joy. I understand that. I just can't celebrate it with you. But I'm not out to try to physically stop or impose those things. But let's just say that we had very loose laws that allowed for human trafficking. All right? We as a society, as a moral people, should say that's an outrage. I think everyone in this room categorically renounces the horror of human trafficking. Everyone with a beating heart has to. All right, well, what if we had laws that allowed for loopholes that continued for kids to be sold into sex slavery? Shouldn't we work our hardest to get those laws reversed and overturned? Jesus said to his followers that we're the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Martin Luther King said that the church must be reminded it's not the master of the state or the servant of the state, but the conscience of the state. So that's what that I'm seeking to be as a moral conscience to the state. As far as separation of church and state historically, what that's meant, as African-American law professor Stephen Carter at Yale pointed out, it was to keep the state out of the church, not the church out of the state. It was freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. So that concept has been fundamentally altered in recent decades. Yes, ma'am?
First, I wanted to recognize that
Can you just speak up a jot more? If you can?
Yeah,
Thank you.
So, if I understand you correctly, the object of the government's involvement in marriage is that it produces a more productive and healthy society?
Yes, government's involved in marriage because marriage produces children for the next generation and joins those children to the mother and father, which is the only reason, stable homes, families, procreation, that the government is involved in marriage or divorce.
And so my question would be, what is your stance on adoption? As in, would you think that it's better for a child to grow up without any parents at all, as opposed to same-sex parents?
Yeah, I say it's better for the kids to have a mom and a dad. You gave the scenario of either
Right.
Grow up in an orphanage or a foster home or have a same-sex couple. There are heterosexual couples on long waiting lists to adopt kids. There are adoption movements across America. So I don't accept that as the only alternative. And I believe that, let's say a mom had to give her kid up for adoption. She suffered some terrible hardship, and who knows what was, the boyfriend was a drug addict, and she's drug addicted. She can't care for the kid. She gives that kid up for adoption. She probably had the hope that there'd be a couple, a mom and dad, that would care for that kid. Probably didn't have the thought that one day that kid may be raised by two men and never know a mother. So the best case scenario is for a heterosexual couple, and there's long waiting lists to adopt. I have friends of mine that for years have been waiting to adopt and trying or having to adopt from outside of America. So that's the best case. Get them in a home with a mom and dad. Right? Anyone who hasn't asked a question, yes, please.
Well, I want to go back to talking about the children.
Yes,
because
please.
I want to become a teacher myself, so I'm hoping I understand this correctly. But you're saying that since a child grew up without a father or without a mother, then they're going to have more issues than a person who was raised in a home with a father and mother.
On average, all
On
things being
average.
equal and on average.
Okay.
Everybody's exceptional. Our president came from a single parent household,
I was
okay?
gonna say, because I was raised in a
Everybody's,
single parent household,
yeah.
and I'm going to graduate college. So you're saying that since I was raised with my mom only, that I'm gonna have issues because I didn't have a father.
No. However, let me say this. My wife, her mom was married 4 times, okay? We've been married almost 40 years now, and we're best friends in the world, have a wonderful relationship. My son-in-law's mom was married 5 times, and he and our older daughter are happily married with a wonderful relationship. However, if you look at statistics, and government is only looking at large pictures, and definition of marriage, we're only talking about the large picture, okay? It's a definite disadvantage, large picture, to be raised either without a mom or without a dad. And you may be the greatest world changer of this generation. We may all know your name in 10 years. That could well happen. That doesn't mean that you won't say, you know, I lack something not having a dad. I know people that look to me, you know, they're looking for like a mentor or a father figure because they didn't have one growing up. So all we're looking at is on average and all things being equal. That's the only way that you can look at anything statistically on any level. And I think that we would agree that the best case scenario is for a kid to not be in a broken home. Even though, look, the things that can be the worst things we ever experienced are often the things that we grow from. In other words, you may be stronger because you didn't have a dad growing up. You may have had to be more independent. You may have developed many excellent qualities as a result of the hardship. What was meant to be a stumbling block becomes a stepping stone. But we do our best not to put stumbling blocks before people. We do our best to provide healthy environments in which they grow. And generationally speaking, kids from divorced homes have a higher percentage of divorce than kids from non-divorced homes. So when no-fault divorce became the law of the land, that was all for the kids. A generation ago when it happened, over a generation, this is the best for the kids. And then one generation later, study after study after study came on saying this was the worst thing for the kids. But that's generational hindsight. Okay, yes, ma'am.
So if the government only cares about the majority, then...
Not the majority, the
Well,
rule.
the-
The rule.
the-
The normal rule.
Right, and they aren't considering the outliers such as couples who can't have kids or elderly couples, and the LGBT community is so small, about 1 or 2%.
Mhm.
Then why not just let them be since they're such a small percentage?
I'm totally for letting them be. Just don't redefine marriage. That's all. When you have 2 elderly people get married, a man and a woman, they're not redefining marriage. When you have a barren couple get married, they're not redefining marriage. When you have 2 men or 2 women get married, you have to redefine marriage. It's just been done. And no one here has presented any reason why it shouldn't be redefined more. If love is love and love wins and marriage equality for all, and I have the right to marry the one I love, then it could be 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever the relationship is. So what we're talking about is fundamentally redefining it. I've not tried to intrude on people's love lives or their private lives or what they're doing or knock on their door and attack them. No, this is now something that has come to us in a fundamental way. And I think as thinking university students, you should really read carefully the 4 dissenting justices and how they ripped to shreds the reasoning used by Justice Kennedy and sound very, very clear warnings. Read the book by Ryan Anderson, Truth Overruled, just looking from a secular perspective about marriage and what's happened with the Supreme Court decision, and tell the polygamists and the polyamorous and the others who already are going to the court saying, what about us? Tell them, hey, they're a small percentage too. So it has nothing to do with the percentages, it has to do with the definition more than anything. All right, anyone, yes, sir?
Okay, if you don't call it marriage, what would you call it instead?
I wouldn't. That's for the individuals to work out. I've got no business calling it anything. It's not my job, and it's not the job of government. You can enter into whatever relationship you want, as long as you're not breaking the law, and call it what you want. You can go to a local gay church, they can call it a civil union, they can call it a marriage, they can call it a holy anything. That's up to them. It's got nothing to do with me, it's got nothing to do with government. We're not involved. It's not our business. It's not our business what people want to do with their private lives. That's just not our business. Okay, all right, round two. Start here again.
All right,
Yes,
so-
sir.
Yeah, your argument's basically this slippery slope argument. You're trying to scare us if same-sex is allowed, why not other things? And there's really no reason why polyamorous marriages shouldn't be allowed. You're saying before that same-sex, like a lesbian couple, would deprive an individual of his biological father, which isn't true. The biological father could easily be in the pictures, and sperm donors don't even have to be monogamous. But imagine depriving that individual of 3 or 4 fathers. You've taken away a lot of his privilege from.
He doesn't have
his
3 or 4
parents'
fathers. You don't have. There's no one in this room that has 3 or 4 fathers.
That's
Okay?
only because
And there's no one in this room that has
polyamorous
3 or
marriage
4
isn't allowed.
mothers. I'm talking about biological. You got 1. But listen, I'm not trying to scare you with the slippery slope. We're sliding down the slippery slope, and you are illustrating it. But your point is, why not all these different relationships, right?
There should be all these different relationships. They're
Exactly.
being oppressed. That's why they're not here.
Oh, okay, so there should be all these different relationships, and once you have them, you have complete societal chaos. You have absolute society. There has never been a society in the history of humanity that has allowed for all types of redefinitions of marriage and survived for us to know its existence. And once you're going to say polyamorous is okay and polygamous is okay, then the law books become almost meaningless. The contracts, the relationships, then you're going to look at long term, and you will not see the same stability. You will not see the same stability, say among gay male couples as among heterosexual couples. You will not see it. Track it over 50 years. Talk to the gay male community about it. You will not see it. You will not see the same long-term stability with polyamorous relationships. And now you are going to have a generation of young people that are going to be coming to you and ask what it was like in your day when you used to actually know what a mom and dad were. You're going to have societal chaos, and it'll be on us. The blood will be on our head in that respect. Yes, sir.
So right now, if I were married to a woman, if my wife was sick, I am entitled to certain benefits. I can help oversee her care. And without the legalization of gay marriage, gay couples legally cannot have the same benefits as if they were in a heterosexual relationship. So therefore, by legalizing and legitimizing marriage for homosexual couples, they're granted the same benefits.
Why is the government obligated to give you a benefit?
Why are they not obligated to do the same thing that you can with your wife?
Because marriage serves a purpose for society, which homosexual marriage
They're
cannot.
still paying their taxes.
Right,
Are they not?
right, but I'm paying taxes
How
if
is
I
it-
was
how
single.
is it-
Yeah,
how
but
is it
hang on.
affecting-
If I'm single, if I'm married, I'm paying taxes. Why do I have to get special? Okay, let's say you decide to live with your girlfriend, but you believe, your deep heart conviction, this marriage is an antiquated patriarchal institution that should be abolished. So you are not, by your deep heartfelt conviction, maybe part of a religious group you belong to, whatever, you're not going to get married. Well, shouldn't the government accommodate that and still give you the same benefits?
There's a bit of even marriage, and that's fine.
Oh, okay, so everybody should get benefits for what? If they
If you're in a
just love each other?
If you're in a relationship and you're doing it, just because you don't have the title, you don't have the ring, does not make it in.
Why is the government obligated to give you a benefit because you're sleeping with somebody? Male, female, same, what is it? Why is the government obligated because you're sleeping with somebody to give you a benefit? The government's got no business doing that. There's no reason to ask the government for it. If you maybe you should sleep with 2 people, you get double benefits. But here's the deal. Let me say this. I believe that if you're sleeping with your girlfriend out of wedlock, but she's the one that you want to be able to visit if you're in the hospital, then you have the right to say that. And if it's a gay couple, and the guy says, that's the one I want to be able to visit me in the hospital, he should have the right to say that. I fully agree with that. But the government is not going to give you benefits just because you're sleeping with somebody. Well, why? Why is the government obligated to do that? Again, the government's only involved in marriage for one reason, and that can only possibly apply to heterosexual couples. Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to go in roughly the same order that we made our first rotation. Yes.
So you said you've been married for 40 years.
Yeah, going on 40. March.
So how has the redefinition of marriage and the inclusion of same-sex marriage impacted your heterosexual marriage?
Yeah, the first thing is, that would be a very selfish perspective. In other words, as long as I'm good, everything's good, and if I'm not good, it's not good. I could ask the same question if 10 people in my neighborhood committed adultery. How does that affect my marriage? Doesn't. If polygamy started tomorrow, how does it directly affect my marriage? At a certain level, it doesn't. But here's how it does. Here's how it does. I got kids, I got grandkids. Our grandkids range from almost 15 to 9, okay? They're growing up in a world now where the schools they go to are now going to start, if they were in secular schools, they're not going to start teaching this as normative because it's called the law of the land. Not only so, I have friends who have lost business, who have been put out of jobs, simply because they could not agree with the redefinition of marriage. So it affects others, and then ultimately, the more and more you break down the meaning of marriage, the more and more you hurt society as a whole. Let me just mention this. If you go to Scandinavia, for example, the Scandinavian countries where the great majority, or the clear majority of couples live together outside of wedlock, okay? You will see in those societies a decrease in the importance of marriage. Those who live together first and then get married afterwards stay together less, and they're having less and less children. And so marriage, procreation, family is becoming less and less and less important on a societal level. That affects everybody. And what I appreciate is you're asking questions. Some of them are personal, but they're bigger picture questions. Because that's how we have to look at this. This is all bigger picture. Listen, I played drums growing up, but the first instrument I learned was organ. When I was 6 years old, I started playing organ. My first organ teacher was a gay guy. And he and his partner would come to our house and have dinner together and hang out. We visited him and his partner in their apartment in New York. I didn't grow up in some homophobic attitude. I'm not out to crusade against people and hurt them. I'm simply looking at the large societal issues. So look, a nuclear bomb could go off in Japan. How does it affect my wife and I? Well, directly it doesn't, but we're part of the human race and there's pain. It affects us in that way. But it's really a secondary question. Although ultimately, over a period of years, it will directly affect us as well. So go ahead, Tim.
And then, so what he was saying about, like, for example, the medical benefits.
Yeah.
My aunt is legally married now to her wife.
Mm-hmm.
And her aunt got into, before they were legally married, her partner got into a really bad car accident and was in an intensive care unit. And because they were not legally married, she had no rights to see her partner, and even though they've been together for as long as you and your wife have, and so the rights went to her partner's parents. So the parents, because they didn't like gay marriage, they said you cannot see your partner, all that stuff. So I think what he was saying, or what I'm asking is, I think there's more to marriage. I think like marriage also doesn't just include procreation. It includes like, if your partner, you are legally accessible to that partner. You're legally accessible to their property, their accounts, so it's not just like whether or not you can procreate, so why can't you include, like there's more legalities than just
Again,
that.
recognize that you can be married without being able to procreate, but the definition of marriage has always required the ability to procreate as units of people, as heterosexuals. But listen, I said before that I think couples should be able to work out if they're just and there are many hospitals who accept this, right? That you can have some kind of arrangement if this is the one I want to visit me. But the very same argument goes for other relationships. A polygamous home, where you've got only the husband and wife number one are legally married, and now wives 2 and 3 aren't, you can have the exact same situation come up then. The government's just not obligated to create situations that make everybody comfortable. You can't just have a million different definitions for a million different people. So what you're saying is that these people can have the benefits of joint custody or hospital visitation or property rights. We redefine the entire definition of marriage for the entire nation, trash the religious liberties of millions of people, overthrow the historic meaning of marriage, create an environment now where by government definition a kid can be willingly deprived of the mother or the father. That's not the way to solve this little problem. Work out other legal ways to make contractual agreements that people can come up with. Fine, do that. Whether you're living together in wedlock as heterosexuals, whether you're polygamous, polyamorous, whatever. Work out arrangements try to find a way to do it, but don't redefine things fundamentally. Yes, sir.
I think something that can also be helpful, being a student, but now, being a voter, being out on your own, being married myself, is you start looking at the process. How you mentioned like the 1-point-something percent, size of the population we're talking about. A very small subset of them actually being interested in marriage or being married.
Right, and even a very small subset of gays and lesbians who are
And
pursuing
then you
that.
look at the process where you have people ask, what do you think as a society in your state, like North Carolina, should be the definition? Because this affects thousands of laws, it affects employment law, healthcare law, of what you must be compelled to do by law, not just, a love thing. So it's a very minute percentage with a very powerful lobby, like Human Rights Campaign, $50 million a year lobby, registered federal lobby. They have someone like Roy Cooper, who's the Attorney General, do kind of a legal maneuver, overturn what the people said. When we say law in North Carolina, it's a man and a woman. We don't hate anybody, obviously. Everybody, it's the same Charlotte, it's the same North Carolina, whether the law was overturned or voted for or amended or unamended by the Supreme Court, right? It's not about bigotry. But at the same time, would you like that with some issue that you think, like the NRA? If people say we don't want assault rifles, and they make it a constitutional ban, and
Right, so we vote on it 61%
people
to
overturn it,
39%.
and then it becomes this thing. Even if people are emotionally attached to it, do you want that to be the kind of way controversial issues are rendered? Or do we want people to say, and especially if we know that there are issues with, let's say, assault rifles. We know that there are issues with men having sex with men, and HIV and STDs, and it becomes an epidemic. And so if we want to help treat this and address this as an issue, then shouldn't we be very careful about, okay, those relationships, we need to make sure that maybe there are medical resources to handle that.
Right, so let me just pursue that for 1 second. So again, bear in mind that the vote of the people across the nation was overthrown. The vote of the people of North Carolina was overthrown, okay? So how would you like it if that was the case? You ban assault rifles by an overwhelming vote, and then someone's gonna come along with some reason, that's bigots, only anti-assault rifle bigots would do it, and they're gonna overturn your vote, all right? You wouldn't appreciate that. But let's go back to the question of how does this affect me? So gay men, that's less than 1 in 50 of the population, right? Yet, off the charts, overwhelmingly, the vast, vast majority of new HIV/AIDS cases in America are men who have sex with men. It's not bigoted to say it, it's fact, it's well known. God didn't make a man to be with a man, and that's one reason it works out like that. It's very simple, all right? Not wired properly for that. So now, if these relationships now go into the general healthcare system, this now becomes my burden. Why is it my burden? Why is it now my obligation somehow to be responsible for health risks that shouldn't be taken, or for a violation of biological principles? So it does affect everybody, ultimately. And you can't justify it just based on, well, two people love each other. Okay, yes, sir, back to you.
All right. I am going to become a social worker, and I'm just wondering still, because everything that you're saying still, it's like only heard 2 different resources you get, basically, of different studies. Everything else, you're still just speaking of what you study and read about. And plus,
do you mean I'm not citing like thousands of studies while I'm
not
here?
thousands of studies, but stuff that you actually got to back it up yourself. You're not throwing out your own statistics of what you found out about it.
Oh, well, hang on. If you're saying that because I have not personally conducted the study, then you have no business even raising a question because you haven't personally conducted a study of the question. And nobody in this room, 99.9% of the professors in this university have not personally funded and conducted a study on a particular area. That's why you go to other scholars. If you pick up a translation of the Bible, you're relying on the people who spent decades studying the languages and the background and the culture. So scholars, scientists, researchers, sociologists, anthropologists, others, they've done their massive research for decades and compiled thousands of studies, which I document. You can go to those sources. So I'm relying on them, experts in the field.
Also, though, you're basing this all on same-sex marriage and all other marriages. I have not heard one little fact about straight marriages still. I heard everything else about what a child will be with like 2 parents that are the same sex, but I have not heard one thing about 2 different parents of different sexes. You have not laid down anything about what those parents will be like and how those kids will be raised. Because I'm very sure any person that's in this room has thought of the same sex. Of a different sex, it don't matter. I know somebody thought of the same sex thing.
So let me ask you a question. Is there a difference between a man and a woman?
No, not really. Just
Not
if
really.
you're talking about sexually, like, okay.
Oh, hang on.
If
You're
you're talking about
2015, UNC
But
Charlotte,
then-
there's not a difference between a man and a woman.
But then again, you can get that changed though. But that doesn't matter. So basically, no.
Bruce Danner is not a woman, okay?
But-
You don't just change, you don't change gender. As Paul McHugh, Professor Paul McHugh, the head of the psychiatry department at Johns Hopkins University, has made clear, you cannot actually change your gender. But put that aside. Are there fundamental differences between men and women?
Wait, before I get to that though.
Can you just answer?
No, before I get to that though. So if a girl takes
Are there
hormone
fundamental-
injections, like what is that? Testosterone? Like what are you talking about?
I didn't just say hormones and testosterone. Are there fundamental differences between men and women?
Yeah, but
Oh, okay, fine. Are they just biological, or are they the way women think, the way men think? Or
Just
they're,
biological.
or let's just do a survey. How many think that not just biologically, but emotionally in other ways, there are fundamental differences between men and women? How many agree with that statement? Oh, okay, thank you, thank you.
because if you said that,
All right,
too-
so just hang on. I'll let you talk in a second. Just hang on. A mother and father think differently. They input different ways into their kids. Look, I have close friends that are men, but under no circumstances do they see the world the way a woman sees the world. And under no circumstances does a woman see the world the same way a man does. We are unique. We're capable of anything. You can have a woman president, you can have a male president. We're capable of all kinds of things, but there are distinct differences in it. Listen, no man can relate to what it feels like to give birth to a baby and nurse that baby. No man can. He's the world's greatest dad, but he's still on a mom. So here's the simple point. There are countless thousands of studies that show that kids do best when raised by the mom and dad. All right, now since everything is equal, you're going to have breakdowns in families, you're going to have problems in relationships. Where did I start? I talked about where the mess that heterosexuals have made of marriage. I started there, right? I started with no-fault divorce. I started with hypocrisy in the church. I said it's our bad. We've done more to destroy marriage than all gay activists combined. That's where we started, right? I'm saying, though, when you just average it all out, with millions of people, those raised by mom and dad will do far better than those raised in a single-parent home or those raised by two men or two dads. And two dads or two moms, and common sense would tell you that because men and women are different, and moms and dads are different.
what are you basing this off of? Like, if
Reality,
one is more masculine
reality,
than feminine,
Earth,
what are you
Earth,
basing
year
this off of?
2015,
Because if
Earth
somebody's
in
more
all
masculine
world
than
history,
feminine,
reality.
But
That's
if
what
the whole
and
gender roles
thousands of
change,
studies.
then it's going to change regardless. Because if a man becomes like a stay-at-home mom, basically,
He's
like
still
a
a mom.
whole stay-at-home dad,
He's still a
like
mom.
the wife is going to be out making money because the
He's
whole gender.
still not a mom.
That doesn't matter though, because you saying that you can't have that love and support for that
I
child,
didn't
like
say
the
it.
brother can't.
No.
Now that's stupid. That don't sound right at all.
But I didn't
Because
say
I'm very
it.
sure. I'm very sure.
Hang on, gotta listen. I said you can love that kid deeply.
But we
I
don't
said
have
there
to
may be a
know
same-sex
the
couple that
pain.
loves
You don't
that
have to know
kid.
that feeling.
Excuse me?
You don't have to know that feeling of how it has to have birth to love that child just as much as the parent does.
I
'Cause you
didn't
basi-
say you love less.
No,
I
you
said
did. No,
cannot-
you actually did. You said that
You
you would
cannot-
know a man would never feel the same
Hang
way.
on, this is me with a high-tech iPhone camera. All right,
Like,
with
I'm
audio
intrigued
here.
by
It's
it.
all, I said you can love that kid, but you cannot have the same feeling that a mother had who gave birth.
So you're
And
saying
if
that
you
the
deny
mother's
that,
feeling
you're
is more than the
sexist.
man's feeling? I thought they were both equal.
But you're not listening. My problem is you're not listening.
No,
You're
I don't
misquoting
think you
me.
understand
Hang
what I'm
on.
saying.
I do understand, but you're not listening. You're not listening. I'm not saying two men can't love a kid. I'm not saying two women can't love a kid.
But I'm not
I
speaking
love
about that.
I love my kids as much as my wife loves my kids, but I'm not a mother, and I cannot relate to what she related to giving birth and carrying that kid. And our perspective on life, our perspective on childbearing, raising our kids is so unique. It's one, but it's so different, and our kids are who they are because of that. If you put two men in the scene or two women in the scene, it cannot possibly equal a man and a woman. Look, there's one woman raised by two moms, fiercely loyal to them, was argued for the gay activist cause until she got married and had her own kid and thought, oh my God, I never had a father. I cannot believe what I was deprived of based on this relationship. So go ahead. You look that kid in the mirror 10, 20, 50 years from now and say, by my choice, you were disconnected from your mom. By my choice, you were disconnected from your dad. And you tell me they're going to thank you for that. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I was going to kind of touch a little bit on what you're saying, and I think you would ask the question because you're raised by a single mom.
And just speak up so we can all hear you.
Okay, I can kind of relate a little bit to what they're saying, because when you put those slides up there that talked about children being raised without a father, I had this kind of like, I'm raising 4 boys by myself.
Yeah.
And
it's a hard, well,
and
hang on.
It wasn't.
But hang on one second.
Can I please finish?
No, I want you to, but I just want to make this point. It is a hardship and it's a challenge, as opposed to something that you say it's the most wonderful thing to raise them without their dad.
I understand, and I agree with you. So what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to help the people in this room who also had those reactions, because the same way, it's like my boys are doing great, and I've been raising them for 8 years by myself because their father died. And I saw the statistics up there, all the suicides and this and that, and it had a little sharp thing. I'm like, are my boys more susceptible to all that? And my first gut reaction is no, because I knew what a challenge that was going to be.
So you knew there's a deficit.
I overcame that, and I think your mother did too. And there may be some same-sex marriages where they recognize the difficulty and they get overcome. And I think that this whole issue of the definition of marriage having to benefit the child for the future, I think it has a lot of validity. I do wish that there were more studies done that, to what you're saying, that would actually define it better, so that instead of going around in circles like it seems like society does over this, that we can actually just scientifically define it, that children really do better being raised in a dual mother-father
Right.
home, and that is better. And if that can be defined, then it's not even the marriage issue, the whole adoption issue. Why are we allowing kids to be placed in single parent homes adopted, or,
None of these are ideal, but that's the
adopted.
whole thing you're saying. And it's courageous and it's difficult and challenging to have to do what you've done. You've recognized there's a deficit. You're not trying to redefine marriage now based on being a single parent. There are obstacles to be overcome, and it's not the ideal situation that you would orchestrate. Whereas same-sex couples are saying, we are going to orchestrate this simply because of our desires and how we're wired. We're not going to orchestrate this and by our choice bring a child into the equation without a mother or father.
What I'm saying is I agree with you. I just really wish, as you were saying, that there was more data.
There is.
Yeah,
There
just
is.
making it seem like
That
it's
it
meant-
was.
There's lots of data.
But I wish
There's
that
lots of
society,
data.
obviously society hasn't embraced the data, because even before this Supreme Court decision, there were homosexual marriages that were being given children in adoption over and over and over. And if that data is really truly out there, and I do believe it is, it somehow is not being embraced.
Because,
And
that's the whole issue. It's not being embraced because it's
Right.
not
Yeah, I
politically
agree with
correct.
that.
Because
So-
people have an agenda, and the agenda is not the best
So in
interest
other
of the
words,
kids.
the marriage, the way it's being defined and the way people are embracing it is all for the purposes of the adults, not the purposes
Exactly.
of the children.
Exactly.
And that's where I'm having a problem with these new decisions and these new ways of looking at things. I'm all for people deciding to be amorous in any way they want or have relationships any way they want, but when it comes to defining a marriage, it needs to be for children. And granted, there are single parent homes that do extremely well, but that's not where you want children placed. And there may be homosexual couples that raise kids well, but that's not the ideal situation. But I do wish the data was more defined out there, and that
Read the book.
our
Read the book,
legislators
yeah.
would embrace it and really come and bring it to the
They're not
forefront.
concerned with data. The legislators are concerned with votes. They're not concerned with data, and they're not concerned with what's in the best interest of the kids. They're concerned with getting reelected, and for the career politicians. Read the book Jephthah's Daughters, okay? One of the editors was identifies as bisexual, Robert Oscar Lopez, raised by 2 moms, okay? Read the book Jephthah's Daughters. Read the research there. Look at how children now become chattel. Children now become involved in adult relationships for the purpose of adults. It is absolutely wrong. And to say it again, it's not to say that there are gay couples who don't love their kids. It's not to say that there are kids raised by gay couples who don't come out great. That's not the issue. The issue is you do not redefine marriage based on one good result here or one good result there. Let me say this, if you really care about kids, one gentleman wants to be a social worker, one woman wants to be a teacher, please hear what I'm saying. Because this has nothing to do with bigotry. There's nothing to do with bigotry. And let me tell you something else amazing. AnonymousUs.org, the young lady who founded that, she expected to be welcomed in all these different groups, gay and lesbian groups. She thought they would welcome what she had to say because so many came from the same background. They did not want to hear what she had to say because it undermined their cause. You know who wanted to hear what she had to say? Christians committed to marriage. And that opened her eyes. Yes, ma'am.
I hope that this isn't like off topic, but I do want to share, like, I was a single mom for a long time. And I lived in heterosexual relationships that were not marriage after I got divorced and I had my daughter. After I got saved, that's my defining moment. I believed in Jesus Christ and he convicted me and just realizing what I was doing wrong. I changed my lifestyle patterns, but I will tell you that my daughter, she had certain things that were obstacles against her. I went from living with my cousin who was a female. That wasn't a replacement for her father. Her father was very absent, by the way. Then I went to living with roommates, several girls. They weren't a replacement for a father either. She, in my personal opinion, had fear against men, didn't know how to handle them, didn't know how to interact with them. She didn't have a healthy relationship. My father, her grandfather, I didn't have a healthy relationship with him for the longest time either. And I can say that those statistics, though we pray and hope that our kids from the single parent households are not going to be that statistic, I can say that I could see where that would come from, why she would be depressed, why she would possibly have suicidal tendencies, why she'd be looking for her identity in something else outside of who she was and just who, what she liked and things, but instead trying to have identity with, I'm totally blanking, but trying to find it in something else, like drugs, or trying to find it in another culture outside of me. Maybe she was upset, maybe she blamed me for getting away from her father, things like that. So those statistics, I don't think were meant to be hurtful. They were just statistics. They were data. They were completely.
You have to work harder to overcome it. It's a hardship and deficit. You have to work harder to overcome it. Therefore, you don't establish that as the ideal situation or the norm. Absolutely. I'll tell you what, we'll take a couple more questions. I appreciate you being so patient and focused and respectful in the midst of differences. So it's almost 9, which is almost 2 hours, about an hour of questions. So we'll take a couple more. And then you can always come on a radio show. I'm on 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, 9:60 a.m. or 105.7 FM, 2 to 4 in the afternoon in Charlotte. Your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-348-7884. All right, 2 last questions. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just had a question. What would you say to someone who's in the room who may be gay, or however lesbian? What would you say after hearing this argument, just of what I should do if I had that desire? I'm gay and I have a desire to be married. What would you say, just apart from scientific reasons, I guess?
Sure. I would say, so first thing I would ask, what's the meaning of marriage to you? Why do you want to be married? Just ask
I
them.
love that person.
Okay, so is there anything stopping you from loving that person and having a church or a synagogue or some group pronounce a blessing on it, and you make a commitment to each other if you believe in God, in the sight of God, or just to each other, you make a lifelong commitment to each other, you get each other rings. Is there anything that would stop you from doing that? No, okay. Now you might want government recognition. When I married Nancy in 1976, I was not thinking about tax benefits or anything like that. It was, we want to spend the rest of our lives together, and so we made that public commitment. So that's your choice to make. I mean, right now, legally, you can do it. I don't recognize it as marriage, but you don't have to care about what I recognize or not. It's your life, right? there was a rabbi, because my wife and I are Jewish believers in Jesus, we invited him to our wedding. My friend was the local rabbi. He said he wouldn't come because it wasn't a traditional Jewish wedding. That didn't offend me. He's a rabbi. He didn't agree. We're still friends to this day, decades later. So if you want to make a commitment to someone, that's between you and God. I would say ultimately that God has something better, that there's a relationship you can have with him and find a wholeness and a transformation and perhaps even a change of your desires. There are such things as former lesbians and former homosexuals, and that you could have a wonderful relationship with a man one day, but if from your perspective that was an impossibility or could never happen, then you make the choice. You make a commitment to that person, whatever sphere of life you're in. You ask to have that be blessed or recognized, and you tell people you're a couple. That's your business. That's what I would say. But right now, my opinion doesn't matter because you can do what you want, quote, legally, right? And then have it recognized by the state. But let's say it was a year ago when you couldn't. That's what I would say. It's your life. It doesn't matter what my opinion is. It's your life. It doesn't matter what the government's opinion is as long as you're not breaking the law. Okay, last question.
So I've somewhat formulated a definition of marriage that I think is...
I'm sorry, I never let you do that before. I'm so sorry.
That's fine. I know that you've got a whole crowd of people. And obviously people have been arguing about this for hundreds of years, so there's no way that this is going to be perfectly right. But I just want your opinion and ideas about the general idea of it. Marriage is a legal declaration in which there is a mutual commitment to maintain a lifetime-lasting intimate relationship.
Between a man and a woman.
And that's your opinion, that it...
Well,
it
but it's always been. In other words, if any society ever establishes marriage, you had to have two essential ingredients, one man, one woman. Sometimes it could be one man, several women, but you had to have a man and a woman. So as long as we have those essential components, so it is the lifelong union, committed union of a man and woman together that's recognized by society or recognized by the state. Yeah.
But what if you change the definition of marriage? Now,
Yeah,
obviously, that's a big deal.
Yeah, so once you change it, once you fundamentally change it, then everything else changes with it. The meaning of husband, the meaning of wife, the meaning of mother, the meaning of father. In which case it becomes meaningless. Here, you're going to leave here, and you say, okay, which way do I travel when I go out of here? I go due north. But I've just changed the meaning that north actually means south. So communication becomes somewhat meaningless. So the one thing that was consistent, as I expected, was that anyone that was arguing with my position had no problem with thruples or polyamorous relationships or whatever else. They had no, and it was like, sure, let it be. Once you do that, now it has no meaning whatsoever in society. You go into the pizza parlor and you order pizza, they said, sorry, we only have Chinese food here. But it says pizza, but pizza to us means Chinese. And look, I say it on a really silly level, but in terms of laws, in terms of society recognizing things, raising children, different things like that, it all breaks down now into one meaningless mass. Hence, there has to be a fundamental definition. In my newest book, Outlasting the Gay Revolution, I do lay out in more detail, once you redefine marriage, that you render it meaningless. And basically, all that I've heard was, yes, that's true, but so what, as long as you love the person. And then, of course, you have chaos. So I'll tell you what, we'll have two last quick comments from the gentleman here.
I'm curious, from your perspective, do you think, based on your slippery slope logic and the current trajectory, do you think in 5 years that you will legally be allowed to have this discussion?
Do I think, with religious liberties, knowing where they're going, that in 5 years, I'll be able to legally have this discussion? I expect that the backlash will be sufficient, that Americans will wake up to the assault on religious liberties, that civil-minded gays and lesbians who didn't want it to go this far, that the backlash will be sufficient, that yes, I'll be able to. However, let me point out that in 2011, we could not find a campus in city after city willing to sponsor a debate on issues having to do with homosexuality. And when finally the University of Central Florida had one professor who booked a room for us so that we could have, this is a campus of 60,000 people, one of the largest campuses in America. She booked a room for us to have. She was almost fired from her job for booking the room. And then gay activists on the campus and some of the vice presidents tried to shut it down. Finally, there was a conference call with 11 people, university vice presidents, gay activists, chief of police. They had a conference call, and they agreed that it would be worse publicity to stop it than to let it go forward. But they said we could only have the debate if we paid for 4 armed police to be present. So this is the type, this is reality. This is the world I live in. So without the backlash, could it be that you do not have the legal right to differ with this, that you're codified as bigger, or let's just say that no campus would even entertain it, that you couldn't find a camp, forget legal, forget being arrested, that no campus would entertain it? Oh, certainly, in 5 years, that could be the case. I expect there's going to be backlash that'll stop that from happening, but it may get worse before it gets better. You get to make the last comment to your question.
What is the outlook that we have right now on gay marriage and divorce? I know that was a big issue. I'm from the Hampshire area, and when the very first civil union couple filed for divorce in civil union after Vermont, the children became, or a child became the main issue, and the parenthood of that child became the main issue. It actually was thought to be overridden. There was legal documentation of who the actual adopted mother was, and she left homosexuality completely. The argument then was by the other mother that that was a wrong and confusing lifestyle. So the argument within that divorce wasn't based on who the actual parent was or who the legal guardian was, but was based on personal opinions. As of this point, it's not going to end. And as a gay man who actually has been set free from that by God, the divorces are going to come, especially in the homosexual male community, very quickly. So where children are involved, where does the law stand right now when those divorces do come? Are they going to have just huge amounts of having to rewrite laws?
You're having
judges that are basically have to rule whatever they want because it isn't the law?
Right, you're having, for example, one judge in Florida has allowed 3 names on the birth certificate: the birth mother, the lesbian partner, and the biological father. So you're going to have.
Are they, like with the Virginia thing, where they actually had that allowed there, but there was one that was named specifically as, the guardian per se, or are they doing it now?
No, right now this is just a birth certificate. All I'm saying is the potential to change in law. So yes, you have all kinds of issues. Let's say you have the biological mother, comes out of homosexuality and is living differently, and now the other mother, who is an adoptive mother, wants custody of the child. You're going to have a lot more issues and problems. Again, heterosexuals have made a mess of things with divorce and tearing families up, but now you just add to the mess because you don't have the biological connection, because you don't have these other issues. You can have the woman who's on the birth certificate is the father, and what kind of custody does she get as the father? I mean, it opens up. Right, it opens up new cans of worms, new problems that keep existing. And again, we're just looking at the large picture. Let me just ask this. I know some of the folks who had a lot of questions and who differed with me have left. And again, I appreciate them being respectful and listening and going back and forth. But just out of curiosity, how many of you came in here tonight and you would say that your basic position, that you agreed with me, what I presented, that was your basic position when you came in? Would you raise your hands? Okay. Any of you differed with me when you came in, because I didn't see your hand? All right, great. Well, thank you. All right, a couple in between. And I guess the ones that most clearly differed have left by now. I hope then, for those who differed, that I gave you food for thought. And I'm very happy to give biblical arguments and get into issues about what the Bible says about homosexual practice and so on, but that wasn't the larger issue. We could get into natural law and men being made for women and women being made for men, and just how we're designed and all that. Those are all important issues. I just wanted to look at this on the legal and societal issue in terms of what we face. So hopefully this is helpful for you, and I very much appreciate you coming. We've got some resources. Only problem is they cost money, and I know you're students. So aside from food and iPhones, you tend not to have money for other stuff. But we've got some books: A Queer Thing Happened to America, Can You Be Gay and Christian, and Outlasting the Gay Revolution, all relevant. But on my website, I have thousands of hours of free material. That's askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org. And if you connect with me there, you can we've got a YouTube channel. And in fact, go to my YouTube channel. It's Ask Dr. Brown. Jot it down, ASKDR Brown on YouTube. And check out my video where I respond to Stephen Colbert. I mean, he's hysterical. So I have a fun response because he's mocking all these different marriages that are going to come. I think he's mocking them knowing they're actually already here. So I respond. So if you go there, I also have a recent video on Bruce Jenner, Woman of the Year, as well as one is zucchini a sexual orientation? Yes, you heard that correctly, zucchini. So check out the latest videos. So trust me, you'll see it. So go to YouTube and go to Ask Dr. Brown, ASKDR Brown. That's our YouTube channel. And then make sure you connect with me on Facebook. We have all kinds of lively discussion and interaction there. All right, having said that, God bless you. I'll turn things back over to
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for a winsome, engaging evening. Agree or disagree, this was a winsome conversation. I want to thank each of you for the gracious interaction, and those that were here were very gracious, and I appreciate that very much. And we're glad to have dissenting voices. We're glad for that. Ratio Christi is about winsome conversations. Now, we're a Christian organization, and we make no apologies about that. We really do believe that the Christian message is true. We also believe that we have an obligation to defend that. And we welcome not just Christians, but we've had atheists, we've had Muslims, we've had others come to our meetings, and they come and they stay because they appreciate the conversation and the opportunity to try out their objections or to investigate the claims of Christ. So if you're one of those people that are interested in that kind of conversation, where it's intelligent and winsome and friendly, where we're still friends at the end, Ratio Christi might be a place for you. We meet 6:30 to 7:30 on Thursday evenings during the semester. Next week we're in Cone 210, but check our Facebook page, which is Ratio Christi UNCC. And we always post our topics that we talk about and our meeting place and our meeting time. This semester we're moving a few times because of logistical problems. But again, avail yourself of the resources, sell your t-shirt, to buy a book, whatever you got to do. And thank you again for coming. Goodbye.
You can reduce prices for folks a little if you need to. If anybody. Josh.
Because you're here and you appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Actually, do you have any copies of the books that you have, or do you only have like one of each?
Oh no, on the table.
Oh, the table outside. Okay, cool. Because for high school we read Everything That Happened to America. Actually, I went to a Christian school back in Statesville, so and we read that one.
I remember the guy that brought that in.
You what?
I remember the teacher that told me he brought that in from school.
Mr. Durham.